When you think of Star Wars, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Maybe it's the opening crawl, Luke, Han, Leia, Stormtroopers, Ahsoka, Jawas, or maybe even Jar Jar. Well, for someone it's probably Jar Jar. But I'd argue the thing most people think about is probably the franchise's most iconic prop, the lightsaber. Not only is the lightsaber incredibly iconic, it purposefully pays homage to many of the weapons and concepts at play in many mythologies and world histories. In this first video on the mythology of the lightsaber, we're going to explore how exactly the lightsaber as a concept connects to Star Wars lore as well as our own world, and why that makes it so iconic on a conscious and even unconscious level. In the world of Star Wars, lightsabers are considered incredibly rare, and oftentimes go for a lot of money on the black market. They're so connected to their users, Jedi are often told that the weapon is their life. The Jedi forge their weapons themselves, which gives them a very personal connection to it, not counting the Darksaber and Anakin's lightsaber, which we'll cover more in depth in part 2. To construct their lightsabers, Jedi must go on a spiritual coming-of-age quest where they must enter a cave to find a kyber crystal, specifically attuned to them. The kyber crystal the Jedi will use will only appear once the youngling in question has overcome some fault or trial. According to Joseph Campbell, whose work had a profound influence on George Lucas when creating Star Wars, rituals are a way in which cultures and mythological figures engage in the ideological framework that makes up that culture. A ritual is the enactment of a myth, and by participating in the ritual, you are participating in the myth. And since myth is a projection of the deep wisdom of the psyche, by participating in a ritual, participating in the myth, you are being, as it were, put in accord with that wisdom. In the episode of the Clone Wars titled The Gathering, a group of younglings must enter a cave to find their kyber crystals in order to construct their lightsabers. This is considered a momentous occasion, a trial of adulthood in the Jedi Order. However, in order for their crystals to appear to them, they must each conquer some weakness of theirs and learn a precept of the Jedi in return. Petro learns selflessness when he must go back and save Katuni. Biff overcomes his fear when he finds his crystal inside the giant scary rock monster, and Gunji learns patience by being forced to wait for the river between he and his crystal to freeze. Each of these trials is meant to further the students' understanding of their own weaknesses, and in turn teach them how to act in accordance in their own society. But the Jedi don't have a monopoly on Force rituals pertaining to the construction of their lightsabers. The Sith have one as well. In the Darth Vader comic arc titled Imperial Machine, Palpatine sends Vader on his own coming-of-age ritual in order to construct his lightsaber, seeing as how Obi-Wan took his original one away after defeating him on Mustafar in Episode 3. The Sith ritual involves hunting down a Jedi, killing them, and then taking their lightsaber as their own. After that, the user then bleeds the crystal from within. The act of bleeding a kyber crystal involves pouring all of the user's hate, malice, and cruelty into it, essentially corrupting it. This makes sense, since the entire Sith ideology is predicated on the rule of two and the taking of power. They aren't meant to learn some greater understanding or overcome a weakness within themselves. They actively triumph over the very concept of weakness, compassion, and love. To the Sith, power is what matters, and their initiation ritual is a reflection of that belief system. In Japanese history, samurai swords were also crafted in a ritualistic manner. In the book Bushido, The Soul of Japan by Inazu Nitobi, he writes, "Daily he commenced his craft with prayer and purification, or as the phrase was, he committed his soul and spirit into the forging and tempering of the steel. Every swing of the sledge, every plunge into water, every friction on the grindstone was a religious act of no slight import." The completion of these rituals means that both the Jedi and the Sith have advanced in their respective societies, and the lightsaber is the symbol of that completion and status. So what does it mean to lose a lightsaber? Generally, in Star Wars, losing your lightsaber means you either haven't completed your training, the Force has some lesson it requires you to learn, or you're probably about to die. In The Phantom Menace during the Darth Maul lightsaber fight, Obi-Wan slashes Maul's lightsaber in half many minutes into the fight. The fate of the saber befalls the user, as Maul is then minutes later cut in half. Whether intentional or not, I find it interesting that even after Maul's saber was cut, part of it continued to work, much like how Maul ended up reappearing in both the Clone Wars and Rebels. His saber becomes double-bladed again in Rebels as he's now fully rebuilt with new legs, and his saber is once again destroyed when he finally dies in Season 3. In The Empire Strikes Back, Luke is deep into his training regiment with Yoda on Dagobah, when suddenly he realizes his friends are in danger on Cloud City. He becomes convinced that if he does not leave his training to face Vader, his friends will die. Yoda warns him that his training is not complete, and that he is not following the precepts of the Jedi. Sure enough, Luke battles Vader on Cloud City, and not only loses his lightsaber, the symbol of his legacy and that of his Jedi Knight ship, he loses his hand, a scar for transgressing on his journey to becoming a Jedi Knight. Another great example of this concept takes place in the Clone Wars episode, Lightsaber Lost. In the episode, Ahsoka's saber is pickpocketed off her during a mission. Ultimately, we discover that it's a lesson in patience, as we see Ahsoka get frustrated at having to wait for things multiple times in the episode. Eventually, we learn that much of her anxiety about having her lightsaber taken away is not only the harm that it could inflict, but the separation from a weapon the Jedi feel a deep bond with.
Master, we've got to hurry.
Patience, young one. You worry that if people die at the hands of your lightsaber, that you will be as guilty for their death as the one that strikes the blow. A valid concern, young one, and one for you to puzzle out.
This bonding of a warrior to their weapon actually comes from Japanese samurai teachings and their belief systems. Samurai followed a code of honor known as BUSHIDO. To a samurai, the sword was their soul, or somehow connected to it. It's a way of saying the warrior's will is also the sword's will. So it makes sense why Ahsoka would be so concerned about who was using her lightsaber. Much like samurai, the Jedi feel a deep connection to their swords. If someone was to use her lightsaber for harm, in a way, it would be her fault for bringing the weapon into the world in the first place, and then not being able to follow the teachings and honor systems that go along with that. Not only is the lightsaber visually iconic in pop culture, but the ideas and various meanings coded into it give it a weight that might not always be apparent. But ultimately, that's what happens with a lot of mythological ideas. They are so prevalent, and they've been around for so long, that we sometimes unconsciously pick up on them, whether they were intended or not. And the lightsaber is no exception.